My day began like so many others, with the soft hum of a coffee maker and the rustle of pages that filled my small apartment in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. Mornings always began with silence, settling into familiar rituals. A cup of coffee, a quick glance at the newspaper, and a commute to work. I worked at the local library, a place that might have seemed boring to most people, but to me it was a sanctuary. Here, among the smell of old books and the dim light of the lamps, I found meaning. My job was not only to put books on the shelves, but also to help visitors who were looking for information or inspiration. The library had its own special magic. Each visitor left an invisible trace in their wake. But at the same time, I remained invisible to them. This suited me. I was an ordinary guy from a poor family, grew up without excesses, and was used to being content with little. That day, I was dusting off boxes of old archives that were lying in the basement. The work was measured but monotonous, and I was already dreaming of a break. When the clock showed noon, I headed to the book checkout counter to relieve a colleague. It was then that I noticed a man who immediately stood out from the rest of the visitors. Tall, in a perfectly tailored suit, he was looking at the shelves, as if he was looking for something, but could not decide what exactly. He was clearly not our frequent guest. Usually, students, retirees, or mothers with children came here. But this man looked like his life took place far beyond this small library. From his expensive perfume to his impeccably ironed shirt, everything screamed that he was someone completely different. At first, I thought he was just a random visitor who came here out of curiosity. But he lingered. I saw him slowly walking along the shelves, running his hand along the spines of the books, as if he was trying to find something special. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to offer my help. As I approached, I noticed his gaze slid over me, lingering for a split second on my old sweater and faded jeans before returning to the books. I soon realized that this man, who introduced himself as Robert, had not come here by chance. He was interested in rare editions of history, and with some incredible enthusiasm that I rarely saw even in students. We began to discuss books, and I quickly realized that he had deep knowledge and a flair for detail. At a glance, he could tell the history of a book, its edition, author, printing features. It was unexpectedly fascinating. However, for all this, he seemed detached, as if he was uncomfortable being here. I knew that such people rarely saw libraries as anything more than a simple resource. Perhaps he felt that here, in this place, he did not belong. But contrary to my expectations, he came again, just a few days later. This time he stayed longer. His interest in books was not superficial, but very deep. But between the lines of our conversation, I began to notice something else. Behind his polite smile and perfect appearance, there was a certain uncertainty. It was not immediately noticeable, but I managed to catch it. Maybe this was his first experience in a place so far from his usual environment. Or maybe he was simply unaccustomed to talking to someone who did not know his name and achievements. Over the course of a few meetings, I realized that Robert was not at all what he might have seemed at first glance. He was clearly educated and, by all appearances, successful, but he did not display arrogance. We began exchanging books and stories. He told me that he lived in the suburbs of Knoxville, worked for a large corporation, and devoted most of his life to business. I, in turn, shared my thoughts on how the library helps people find themselves and escape from the daily grind. These conversations became something special. Gradually, we began to exchange opinions not only about books, but also about life. I noticed how Robert listened to me, really listened, as if he was trying to understand what I was saying. And I, in turn, realized that behind his mask of success and confidence there was a man who was perhaps looking for something more than money and a career. Time passed, and our meetings became regular. We discussed books, exchanged thoughts on classics and modern authors. But most importantly, we began to build a bridge between two seemingly completely different worlds. I knew that many of my friends and acquaintances would not understand why I was wasting my time communicating with a person whose life was so far removed from mine. But for me, it was a challenge, to learn to see the real person behind the external facade. When the library closed that evening, I looked at the empty shelves and thought that perhaps this friendship would change not only his life, but mine as well. I couldn't say exactly where all this would lead, but I knew that I wanted to continue this unusual path. As time went on, our meetings with Robert turned into something more than just conversations about books. At first, we were limited to the library, but one day he invited me to an exhibition of a local artist, which was taking place in an art gallery in the city center. It was unexpected, but I agreed. I couldn't understand why he would invite me, a mere librarian, to an event that was clearly aimed at people of his class. But curiosity got the better of me. The gallery greeted me with a majestic hall with a high ceiling and huge windows through which soft daylight streamed. The paintings on the walls were bright, lively, sometimes chaotic, but there was an energy in them. I had never been to such an event. Everything here was alien to me. From the educated conversations that were taking place around, to the light clinking of glasses of champagne. Robert, on the contrary, seemed in his element. He freely communicated with the guests, made accurate comments about the artist's work, and seemed to be familiar to everyone here. But what surprised me most was how he behaved towards me. He did not leave me alone with my feelings, did not try to squeeze me into the framework of his social environment. Instead, he began to explain the paintings in simple terms, showing that art is something universal, accessible to everyone. His manner was not didactic, but sincere. We discussed colors, shapes, emotions embedded in the paintings, and I suddenly felt that I was on an equal footing with this man who seemed to be my complete opposite. The exhibition passed quickly, and on the way out I realized that I had learned more about Robert that evening than in all our previous meetings. He was not just interested in art, he lived it. For him, it was a way of expression, a way to escape from his strictly structured world. His stories about artists, about how paintings can reflect human feelings, made me see another side of him that I had not even suspected. After that evening, we began meeting outside the library. Sometimes it was walking along the Tennessee River, where Robert would tell stories of his travels around the world, and I would share stories from my childhood in a simple neighborhood of Knoxville. Sometimes we would go to small cafes, where we would spend hours over a cup of coffee and discuss books, paintings, films, and even social issues. The more I got to know Robert, the clearer it became that he was not the perfect and self-assured person he seemed at first glance. He told me that his life was built on strict expectations. His father, a famous businessman, always believed that success was measured by the number of zeros in a bank account, and his mother, who came from a wealthy family, paid attention only to appearance and social status. Robert felt from childhood that he had to live up to these standards, even if they did not bring him joy. I, in turn, was his complete antithesis. My family never aspired to wealth or fame. We lived modestly but happily, enjoying the simple things. I told Robert how my father taught me how to fix an old car, and how my mother showed me how to make the best homemade pies in the world. My life was not perfect, but it was filled with warmth, which, as I realized, he sometimes lacked. These differences between us did not push us away, but, on the contrary, brought us closer. We began to share our views on the world and even argue. Robert said that a person should strive for success in order to change his life and help others. I argued that success without inner happiness is an empty shell. Sometimes our conversations became heated, but always remained respectful. One day, he invited me to take part in one of his charity projects. It was a children's educational center, which Robert supported financially. I immediately agreed. The center was located in an old building on the outskirts of the city, where local children could gain knowledge, play, and develop for free. I was amazed at how deeply Robert was involved in this matter. He didn't just donate money, he personally knew each child, each teacher. His eyes lit up when he told how one of the kids managed to get into a prestigious college thanks to the center's help. That day, for the first time, I felt how much my perception of this man had changed. Robert no longer seemed like a stranger from a world far from mine. He had become a friend to me, a person who was ready to listen, share, and help. But what surprised me even more was how interested he was in my views and ideas. He wanted to know how I saw the world, what my values were, what was important to me. Our friendship grew deeper. I began to notice how the stereotypes I had about people from his circle were slowly crumbling. He was not cold and arrogant, as I had initially assumed. Robert, in turn, admitted that he had previously believed that people from my circle did not strive for something more. But now he understood that it was possible to be rich in another sense, rich in emotions, memories, simple joys. Even though we still lived in different worlds, something that could be called a true friendship was growing between us. We both understood that each of us was learning from the other, that our connection was helping us become better. One evening, sitting on a bench by the lake, I caught myself thinking that this friendship had changed not only my attitude towards Robert, but also towards myself. I felt that I had become more open, ready to accept people as they are. Robert, in turn, seemed calmer, more relaxed. One day, sorting through old books in the library, I found a small volume that seemed to have been forgotten long ago. It was a publication of poetry by a little-known poet, but it had an inscription written in someone's hand. It spoke of gratitude for the friendship that had changed my life. These words strangely touched me to the quick. That same evening, I decided to take this book with me and show it to Robert, feeling that it could become something symbolic for us. Robert took the find with interest. We were sitting in a cozy coffee shop on the corner of an old street, where the windows were decorated with pumpkins and autumn leaves. He looked at the book for a long time, running his fingers over the yellowed pages, as if trying to understand its hidden meaning. And then he told me something that he seemed to have been holding back for a long time. He shared that in recent months he had felt at a crossroads. His career, which had once seemed like the goal of his life, no longer brought him joy. Despite his successes and recognition, he felt emptiness. More and more often, he thought about leaving his corporation and doing something more meaningful, but the fear of losing everything he had built was too great. His confession caught me by surprise. Robert, always confident, now seemed confused and vulnerable. I knew that his world, full of strategies and achievements, was built on clear rules and expectations. For him, the realization of his own uncertainty was something like a defeat. But I did not see this as weakness. On the contrary, it made him more real. I suggested that he return to the Children's Educational Center where we had been together. It seemed to me that this place was not just a project for him, but something deeper. Robert agreed, and the following weekend we went there. The center had a life of its own. Children played, drew, studied. Robert, as always, knew each child by name, and this made me smile. But that day I noticed that he was not just watching from the sidelines. He himself had become a part of this place. As we left the center, Robert seemed calm but thoughtful. He said that he wanted to do something more for these children than just support them financially. I encouraged him to think about how he could use his talents and resources to make a lasting difference. This seemed to be a revelation for him. But the most unexpected twist was when he came to the library a few days later with a new proposal. Robert wanted to organize a series of educational events for children and teenagers in the library to inspire them through books, art, and lectures. It was a bold idea, but I knew it could work. We started working on the project together. It was not easy. We had to agree on a budget, attract volunteers, prepare materials, but this work gave me the opportunity to see Robert in a new way. He was incredibly persistent and goal-oriented, but at the same time open to new ideas. For the first time, I felt like I was working with him on an equal footing. The project started a month later. The first event was dedicated to books that changed the world. We invited school children from the surrounding area and held an interactive meeting where the children could not only listen, but also share their thoughts. Robert seemed to glow. He spoke about books with such enthusiasm that I could not help but admire. But the most amazing thing was how the children responded to him. They saw him not as a successful businessman, but as a person who genuinely wanted to help. However, this path was not without difficulties. Some parents did not immediately accept the idea, believing that Robert was using this event as an advertisement for his business. There were also those who doubted the sincerity of his intentions. I saw how these accusations hurt him, but he did not give up. Instead, he devoted even more time to meetings with parents and teachers, explaining that he wanted to give children the opportunity to dream and believe in themselves. This experience was a test for both of us. I helped Robert as much as I could, but I also learned a lot myself. We both realized that breaking down barriers between people is not an instant process, but a long and difficult path. However, it was in these moments that we realized how valuable our friendship was. It gave us the strength to move on. By the end of autumn, it became clear that our project had become a real success. The children enthusiastically participated in the events, and even the most skeptical parents began to recognize its benefits. But most importantly, Robert had changed. One such evening, as we sat in the library after yet another event, he suddenly said that he felt freer than ever. This phrase stayed in my head. I realized that our friendship had given him something that money, success, and recognition could not. And perhaps I myself had gained much more from it than I expected. Winter brought silence and calm to Knoxville, covering the city with a light blanket of snow. The streets were empty, but the library continued to live its quiet life. After the successful completion of our project with Robert, I expected that everything would return to normal. But our friendship became more than just a temporary alliance. It became part of my daily life. Robert began coming to the library not only to work on new initiatives, but also simply to read or discuss a book with me. He no longer wore impeccable suits, as in the early days. His clothes became simpler, his gaze softer, and his conversations less formal. At times I even forgot who he was. He fit so naturally into this environment. One day he brought me an envelope. To my surprised look, he responded with a short explanation. It was an invitation to the opening ceremony of a new educational center that he had decided to create. Robert explained that he realized how important this mission was to him and decided to make it his main goal. The center was to open in the spring, in the same area where the library was located. There, children could not only study, but also find support, communicate, and be inspired. He asked me to be a part of this event, and I could not refuse. Spring came faster than I expected. The opening day was sunny and warm. The center that Robert had built was a real embodiment of his dream. A modern, light building with large windows and bright classrooms filled with books, paintings, and comfortable furniture seemed to come to life as soon as I crossed its threshold. I could not believe that this project, which began with a simple idea, had become a reality. A lot of people gathered at the opening. There were children with their parents, local teachers, representatives of the city administration. Robert gave a short speech thanking everyone who had helped him realize this project. He mentioned me, and I felt a warmth in my chest hearing that our friendship had inspired him to take this step. At that moment, I realized that my life had changed thanks to him, too. But the most touching moment was how the children embraced this center. They ran around the halls, studied the bookshelves, drew on specially prepared stands. In their eyes was the joy for which, I knew, Robert had devoted so much time and effort to this cause. One of the boys approached Robert and handed him a drawing. It was an image of a large book with smiling children standing around it. Robert leaned toward the boy and thanked him with a sincere smile. After the ceremony, I approached Robert. We stood to the side, watching the lively crowd, and I asked him what he planned next. Robert looked at me and said that for the first time in a long time, he felt that he had found his place. He no longer wanted to be just part of the corporate world. Now he wanted to create something meaningful that would leave a mark. In the weeks that followed the opening of the center, Robert and I continued to communicate. I no longer looked at Robert as an outsider from a different background. He became just Robert to me, a friend closer than many I had known for years. As the snow began to melt and spring came into its own, I realized that our story was more than just friendship. It was a reminder of the importance of opening our hearts and minds to new things. Robert and I began this journey as very different people, but eventually realized that our differences did not divide us, but enriched us. Because friendship is not just about meeting and talking. It is about seeing in another person what makes them unique and respecting that.